I'm here in Los Angeles once again talking to Claudia Parducci. Thank you once again for being part of my StudioCrasher project. The last time we did a series of interviews was about getting 2 years ago, 1.5 years ago. No, it was 2.5 years ago. Tell me a little bit about what has happened with your work since then, because the work that I see in the studio now is, you know, there's a logical extension from that, but also I think that the larger context, the larger frame has changed somewhat in this country. So.
Yeah, it has changed. Well, I think, you know, for a really long time, it's part of my nature to look at worst case scenarios. And I think I've just kind of built that way. And so my work was kind of confronting fear, basically. That's what drove my exploration. And many of my worst case scenarios have come to be. And what I found is, you know, I was looking around and suddenly everybody's in a state of, you know, anxiety and fright and so I began to think about whether there was a way to kind of pivot my work to be less about exploring worst case scenarios and more about exploring you know, the flip side of that, like how do we handle worst case scenarios, what do we do with that information. And my work had been for a really long time now playing off of architecture mostly as a metaphor or a signifier of you know, environments we build for our safety, for shelter and whatnot. And I began thinking about historically how today's political moment is actually more the norm than the last 50, 60, 70 years of relative world peace. And that has not stopped people from building and rebuilding and living. And the norm is to tear things down. The norm is to invade and bomb and tear things down, and the norm is also to rebuild, and that's just what we do, and it's what we've always done. And I began thinking about, as I did before, about the fallibility of architecture and the kind of the fragility of the investment we put into it, this idea that we can actually protect ourselves from disaster by building a strong enough building, and there's something kind of poignant and beautiful about that, and so I began making work. I began doing these columns, and I wanted them to at the same time appear to be structural, while you know they can't possibly hold anything up, you know. So they have the idea of structural support, and they kind of collapse on themselves because they're really just made of fiber, and you can see air going through them and light going through them. And
it's, to me, it's. I remember when I was here a couple of years ago. Your friend Bruce came from the East Coast, and you were looking at one of the Morrow building
paintings or drawings or something,
and I have this on camera, which is great because I can, you know, kind of cut it in. But Bruce was saying about how on that particular drawing, there was a little white space at the bottom, and there was a sense. It gave you a real sense of, you know, kind of not being able
disintegrating or falling down.
The thing I really like about that one, though, as opposed to the croppings, is for me, the falling down space is still. I mean, it still could be coming down.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas on these, they're all supported and cropped and reestablished as a solid kind of. Whereas on this one, I really like it. I prefer it, and that's just subjective. But It's like there's a weight above and nothing below. So
Right.
what's holding it up? Is this going to continue? Could this actually avalanche down on me? So therefore,
Which gets me to why I'm using charcoal.
yeah, but that's just it. There's a weight and an ephemeralness about it at the same time.
Yeah.
That's why. But the same thing is, all of a sudden, this space is not open and airy. You know, in a
Exactly.
sense, it's kind of compacted by the weight above it.
Right.
So it's a really dense space.
Yeah.
And the verticality of the falling of that,
Yeah.
I think that's my.
And I see in these a kind of a three-dimensional,
Very much so. Very much so.
exploration of that. Yeah.
And both were, oddly enough, dealing with, in a formal degree, working with line, like thinking about line and two-dimension to three-dimension, like the grid. That piece sort of started with the grid, which was kind of about using line to think about dimensionality. And these are built out of thread. I mean, I still think of them as line drawings in a weird way, as three-dimensional line drawings, you know. And in the process of doing these, did I tell you about how I came up with the number? I've told you about that.
I don't know.
Okay, so I wanted to make these, and I knew I wanted a bunch of columns. I wanted so many columns that they would really push the point home that this place is, really strong, and the ceiling will never come down. And so I was thinking about buildings that you have used columns, and of course I thought about the Parthenon, and I thought, how many columns are around the Parthenon? It was too many.
Right.
But there are interior columns.
Yeah.
And I discovered that there are different interior columns in that structure. There were in that structure, but it was a structure built for Athena. It was a pagan temple, and there were 23 columns that surrounded Athena on three sides. And researching that, I really didn't know much about Athena. She's a major goddess. She was like the main one. But it turns out that she represented justice, war, and craft,
Right.
which blew my mind. And she was considered to be a master weaver. But the idea that you would put craft up there with war and justice, that as like one of the three pillars of a society, was kind of mind-blowing. Like wow, that is a very interesting and advanced idea, and far more advanced than where we're at today.
Yeah.
Certainly in this country.
And it combines that destruction and kind of building.
It does, and then if you look at the history of that building, it was a pagan temple. It was a Christian temple. It became a mosque. It had minarets on it. It was a weapons depot. It was blown up, and it has been built and rebuilt. It's been burned, and yet it still kind of stands. And I think of it as a kind of picture, in a weird way, of sort of the resilience of the human endeavor. So when I made these, originally, my plan had been to kind of fuck them up and burn them and whatnot, but there were numerous reasons why I didn't use fire. One reason is that I'm working with jute. And the other reason is that they're knitted, and the whhole thing would unravel. Right? So I'm messing them up different ways, but I'm dyeing them instead and sort of giving them a kind of a weathered tinge, singed.
I thought that because when I saw the first batch of these that you did, which was probably just over a year ago, they were just all black. They were,
They were blue, actually.
Blue, yes, that's right.
Yeah, that was kind of a tester bunch. And the idea was very much at its beginnings, you know? I mean, I had this idea of making columns. All the research into the Parthenon came after the fact, basically, like trying to figure out, what columns, represent, that kind of thing. And then, you're seeing things in a very experimental stage right now. Like these mirrors, for example, which have plastic over them. They're actually not as messed up as they look, but the mirrors are something I'm playing around with because these columns are 15 feet tall. I recently was installing some, not this on the first batch, in a show where the roof is actually taller than 15 feet.
Right.
And so they were hovering above the floor. And I had to think about how to negotiate that space at the bottom. Like, do you leave it? Do you leave that tension? It's no longer looking like it's holding anything up. And in the Parthenon, when the Athena statue was there, people couldn't come into the temple. Apparently, there was, the reason there's all these columns is so they can look in and see the 30-foot tall statue, but they weren't allowed to go in and touch it. Yeah. So there was this trough in the floor that was filled with water that sort of reflected off of all her gold clothing.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah. So I started thinking in terms of, reflection, and so I played around with the idea of having sort of these round, reflective surfaces like that pool around, but it's not really there yet. It's something I'm experimenting with.
So you just started with the...
I just started playing with it when the thing is lifted off the floor, which it was in this other space. I don't get the type of... You have to be standing right on it to get that infinity thing, which is what I was after. And so I don't know if mirrors will still come into play or not. They might, somewhere. I really like the combination of the reflective surface with the rope. And other work, like always, other work is sort of sprouting from this. I started with these. I began just simply exploring the material, twine. I began looking for, I began doing works on paper. These were probably here last time you were here, some of these. I started making drawings on paper with the twine. And these, I don't know if you'll see, these worked really well. And one of the reasons they worked really well is you got this wonderful shadows that gave it a dimensional element.
Yeah, you were starting to work, you were working on these probably about a year and a half ago. Or
it came out of that piece where I was basically looking for something more fugitive than rope.
Yeah.
And so I was trying to work with shadow, and so I built that rope thing so it would project shadow, and then same thing with these. And these were problematic in that the ropes would hang off them and they can't be framed, and they're just in terms of conservation, it was tricky. And so I decided to try doing them as painting, doing them on stretched canvas. Well, first on unstretched canvas, which didn't work, and then on stretched canvas, which obviously changes them enormously. And these also are very much in flux. They become a much more severe kind of an object than they don't really have the play, I feel, that the columns have. And so I'm still experimenting with this. Part of the severity that I'm responding to is simply the colors, the white and the brown. And so I'm beginning to play a little bit with linen to see if that helps. But the other thing I've started to do is to bring these back to paper and to use these as a basis for drawings. And I'm actually really happy with the way those are going.
So you've started the works over there in the corner.
The works over there in the corner come after these. Yeah.
And are you using charcoal again with?
I'm using pencil and charcoal.
Yeah.
Mostly pencil is what you're looking at. The shadow lines are charcoal.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they're interesting because when I arrived today, I was looking at them thinking that they were string works like these.
Right.
But they're actually much more trompe-l'oeil, aren't they?
They are, and I realized as soon as I started to make them that they were, but I certainly didn't make them with that in mind, and I actually couldn't tell you why. I think it's just the line quality, like why it reads so much that way. Maybe it's just the, that it's just black and white. I don't know, but they're very successful at fooling the eye, for sure. And those I really love, because to me there's a real humbleness to this material that I'm using, the twine.
Let's go over there and have a look. This will look weird in the 360.
And all of this work is incredibly labor intensive.
Yeah.
It takes me weeks and weeks to knit 15 feet of pillar. And it's become really important to me, that time investment. That I think you feel it, one senses that, and because that time investment kind of represents what sort of our resilience, our ability to just man labor, elbow grease, and that it's still valuable even today with the speed of the internet and all of that. We still have to physically rebuild our buildings and remake society when it breaks down, and it's somehow become really meaningful to me that I make these myself and that I make them the old-fashioned way, So this has been a much slower to develop and create project than I probably ever worked on. Like, I'm only halfway there.
So
I'm a little further than half. I'm making 23 columns, and I've probably made, 17 or 18.
How long does it take?
Actually, I'm making 26. It kind of depends. I do have an assistant that comes in once a week and gives me about 3 or 4 or 5 hours of knitting, if I'm lucky. I would say at most, well, let's see. I've been working on these, I'd say, for about a year, and of this group, and I have about 18 made. So that's about 1.5 a month. But I'm trying to push now. I want to be done with them. I want to have finished 26 by the end of the year. Yeah. And we're mid-September.
Yeah.
So I'm getting a little tired of knitting, to be honest. But this is a sculpture, and the sculpture came out of it, and I really love it. This is the sawhorses, which is a sculpture that's in flux, because originally the sawhorses were just a holding tank for my columns in process. And so the columns, come and go, and I have enough of them. I do the dyeing process, and then a whole new batch starts to go on there, and it became like, just to me, a kind of very beautiful. It's like a river. It's in flux. It speaks to the process of making.
So are the sawhorses actually
part of the sculpture? Yeah. And when this is ever shown, it won't be these. It'll be other columns draped over it. Yeah. Because these particular ones are going to be dyed and become part of the column installation. Yeah.
Why the use of jute? Is it because of the rough quality that you get, the sort of rope-like quality?
I like a few things about it. It's an incredibly humble material. Yeah. It's used for tying tomato vines. It's been used all over the world by people of little means to make baskets. It's just a natural fiber that's been around forever. And I like its imperfections. And I like that it's not expensive to work with, considering how much I use. What drives me is pretty specific and literal, but that the work often goes to a much less literal place, and so far from that people come to it and bring completely different things to it, for me that's not. It has to be built into the process. Otherwise, if your intent is that everybody read your work exactly as you thought about your work, then you get into a kind of didactic place.
And you're trying to, I suppose, hit a balance so that it's you maintain a sort of a poeticness about about what you're trying to deal with, so that's not
exactly. You want to maintain poetic space where ideas can play and people can respond to it and be surprised. I mean, ultimately, I feel as if we respond to surprise. Both in an intellectual way and also just aesthetically. There's what makes us look twice at something.
So these will be shown here, the columns?
The columns are going to be shown right here in this studio. I'm doing for the first time, I'm having a show in my studio. I have a couple friends who do really great work. They're both photographers. And we really struggled to figure out how our work connected to each other. They're really connected, which is why I invited both of them to show in the studio. And I was prepared to take the columns down, and they were like, no, let's leave the columns up. And then I was like, well, we have to justify it somehow.
Yeah.
Like, how do we justify these columns being up for this show we're doing? So, but everything on the walls is going.
Yeah, I was going to say from a practical reason, if they're photographers, then that works perfectly because, they have they've got this space.
Yeah, they've got the walls.
Yeah.
And these just become an architectural element in the space.
Yeah.
I thought I turned my phone off.